One of my biggest goals for this channel is to give you exactly what you need to level up your music production. And that's oftentimes a request on how somebody made a synth or a drum or whatever. And one request that came in pretty often is obviously the new Eternity track on Afterlife. And yes, we are gonna cover it now. Okay guys, so this is what we're talking about today. In this video, we're specifically talking about the lead only. And next week then, you should come back to the channel because we're gonna talk about all the different tracks here, the kick and bass, the drums, the second lead sound here. Today is all about the first one. And let me tell you, I rebuilt quite a lot of tracks for this channel already, and there was no rebuild like this before. It was so hard to figure out in the first place what was happening here, and it's such a complex and detailed sound, which is why I want to dedicate a whole video to it in the first place. And first of all, maybe let's have a look at the notes. You can see they are fairly simple. We only have a C playing all the time. I have added some different velocities here, and you can see that the notes are not full length of a 16th, right, but rather a bit shorter, so they don't connect with each other. And yeah, of course, it's 16th notes all over the place. Pretty simple stuff here, but the magic for sure happens within the synth. And first of all, let's open Serum and let's have a look at this. So when we look at this patch, it doesn't actually look that difficult, I would say, right? Because we have two saw waves, and at first glance, that's it, right? There's only two saw waves. So what we see is they are a little bit detuned against each other. And also we have one unison activated and one without unison. So we have a bit of stereo information, but not the whole synthesizer, like not both of the oscillators are playing unison notes, which means we have a mono signal and a stereo signal. This is always a good way to have a little bit of stereo with, but not too much, right? Because if we have too much, we might lose a little bit of power, right? It's always good when a sound also has centered information, so it feels a little thicker. Then again, we can see that there's some pulse wave modulation on the two oscillators, right? So both have the warp PWM down here. And I want you to have a look at what's going on down here with all the automations, right? Let's have a look again. You can see that everything is moving quite a bit. So let's have a look at those lanes. Yes, this is quite a lot. And what I want to say right from the start, this is definitely not the 100,000% exact way that they have it in the track. I think that's fairly impossible to recreate it 100%. What's rather more important is to have the actual feeling of the sound, right? The actual synthesis elements, and then it's a little bit tricky to get the exact automations. And I think we're pretty close here, especially with like the first two, and yeah, don't worry about this. Let's dive into the sound now. So the first very important thing that we see that's kind of hidden a little bit is we have a filter here, but the filter is only on the B oscillator, not on the A oscillator. So that's already pretty interesting, because it means technically that when the filter is moving down, which it does quite a bit, right? It goes down like all around to that point, maybe goes back up, back down, but it always only filters the oscillator B. So oscillator A never gets filtered kind of, because if we look at the effects here, which is also quite a bit, we can see that there's another filter on here on the distortion, right? And we can actually see that this one is also automated. And you can see it's also moving, but not that much, right? So this is already pretty interesting. And why do we do this? Because we have two different components to this sound, really. And the first one is this kind of super saw feeling, very fuzzy oscillator B, right? Let's listen only to that one. So it kind of feels like this one is doing the main kind of substance of the sound, right? Where you have this, what I just said, the super saw feeling. But if we listen closely, especially, for example, here in the second installment, there is something missing if we leave away the oscillator A. And if you're paying close attention, then you can see that the level here is also automated. It's kind of going down and not really coming back up, but here it's much higher. So let's have a listen to only this one. So that sounds pretty interesting, right? It kind of feels like the sound gets completely swallowed at some points and it's not really even there anymore. And then again comes back up really loud. And this is part of what makes this sound so complex, but also what gives it this kind of very interesting feeling. So basically what we have to understand is with oscillator B, we have this kind of super soft feeling, which is much more upfront and kind of gives the body to the sound. And then oscillator B is this kind of texture. It's hard to describe in words, actually. I wouldn't really find good words for that, but I think you can hear that in combination. It kind of sounds like those are two waves, and when one is down, the other one comes up, and then they switch, you know? So this is essentially like a play between those two, and that's also why it's so important to have the filter only on one oscillator, at least one installment of the filter. So technically you can see this as the filter only for oscillator B, while this is the filter here for both A and B. And this way I can kind of control a little bit better where do I get the higher frequency content from, because especially the oscillator B with the super saw kind of feeling has a lot of those kind of fuzzy textures in the high frequencies, as I said, and they're not always like necessary, right? So this is pretty interesting. Filtering rise, subtractive synthesis, as always, is very much fun, and it once again goes to show you that you don't need that much. We only have two saw waves. We have a little bit of pulse wave modulation, sure, and yeah, a filter, right? Two filters, but for sure there's more. So let's have a look at some of these automations. So first of all, the pulse wave modulation is a great tool to make the sound a bit thinner and then thicker if you want to. So moving from here to the right will make the sound much thinner, right? You can see that also in the movement. When the wave kind of gets pushed to one side, we essentially lose low frequency content of the oscillator, and therefore it kind of feels thinner. So this is already one thing that we are automating here, and you can actually see the pulse wave modulation is on controlled like together with this one macro. And if we have a look at the automations, it's right here. It's this lane. We can see that it kind of is up, goes down, back up, back down. So, right, we get this feeling of the sounds coming closer, far away, closer, far away, right? So let's continue. Then we have the filter movement also kind of contributing to the fact, as well as the volume of oscillator A, which I said before is this kind of more tonal oscillator on top of it. And so basically those three automations here, they kind of make the whole movement of the sound, of the two sounds, you could actually say. And up top here we have the distortion frequency. So that's the second filter, right? And you can see the movement here is very like subtle. So this is more like general shaping of the sound, while those are really, really much about sculpturing what we want kind of which harmonics and which kind of texture we like, right? And then we have two more automations that are very important, this one here and this one up here. First of all, let's talk about this one up here. So we have essentially just an octave switch on the oscillator A. So while at the first kind of shot here, we are at -1. We should listen to oscillator A only. Right, it sounds lower and then it gets higher, right? And you might be wondering yourself at this point, why didn't I really mention the kind of pitch changes yet? Because you see, this is only C notes, but still you can definitely hear that there's some pitch going on, right? It kind of moves up and down and back up and stuff. So when I started recreating this, I wasn't sure in the beginning if they use different notes or if it's more like a modulation, but I'm pretty sure that they use some kind of pitch band, which is down here, right? So you can see the pitch band here is set to +3 and -2, essentially allowing us to go from a note which is in the scale, +3, so it's the minor third, down to the -7th and then back up. So it kind of feels very tonally right, even though it's just pitching through all the different pitches without really like stopping at a note and then going to the next note. Like it would be so different if we would like, I don't know, do something like this. It wouldn't even make sense because we would have like steps, you know, it would be like first this step, then this step, then this step. But with the pitch bend, it's more like a curve, right? And you can see this curve down here. Oops, it looks a little weird, you know. And once again, those movements are not 100% accurate, but I think they kind of get the general vibe. So now let's have a look at additional effects and all the stuff we have on here. So we talked about the pulse wave modulation, we talked about the oscillators and the filters. Let's go into the FX section now. And first of all, let's talk about the phaser, right? That's here. And you can see we have the phaser here on like kind of 66%, right around here. And the phaser is just adding a little bit to this kind of moving texture, right? So it's once again something like this pulse wave modulation, something like those filter and volume modulations. It makes the sound come closer and more far away, and in general gives it more this kind of alive feeling, right? It's down here in the macros because it's not necessary for 100%, I would say, especially if you want to use this sound for yourself, which for sure, as always, is possible. Just go down, follow the link in the description, and you can download this sound for free. Yeah, you can play around with the phaser, you can play around with the pulse wave modulation, and you can also play around with the multiband dynamics here, which is actually just here for like, let's say 25%, but you can also disable this and the difference is not going to be too huge, right? So this is just a little bit of mixing stuff. For me, it sounded a bit better with this kind of little bit of multiband dynamics added to it. Then we have an EQ for sure, only cutting the lows here. And lastly, a reverb, right? You can see this here, also like 25%. So that's not that much, and it's really there to only give just a little bit of width and a little bit of stereo information on top of what we have here through Unison. And so basically, through all of those effects and all of those modulations, the sound is already like completely done kind of within the synthesizer, which is pretty cool, and a feature of Serum with all those effects, which is very like useful when you produce, because you don't have to have like 20 effects here in the chain. Everything is already in the synthesizer and can be used there. So what do we have here then? It's not that much. Let's have a look at this. First of all, we have a saturator. You can really hear how it just like subtly thickens the sound a little bit, which is very important for those massive leads. If you have a listen to Anyma and Chris track, you will notice that the sound is like right here. It's so upfront, and for this, saturation is really important. Also, we have an EQ added here, and you can see I'm cutting away a lot of the low frequencies. Once again, we have a lot of information down here in the kick and bass, which, let me say that once again, I will explain next week in another video about this whole topic, right? So stay tuned, come back next week. on Friday and have a look at this video. We are boosting some frequencies here around 2000 just to give it a little bit more of this kind of nagging feeling, right? And then we have a high cut to get rid of those noisy, fuzzy, really high frequencies that are coming from the oscillators, right? So let's do a before and after. So generally, this is really just removing frequencies, content that we don't need, right? Because if you listen to this in solo, it's always like, for sure, it sounds a little thinner and weaker and smaller without all those low frequencies, and it also sounds a little less brilliant because we took away like frequencies above 10,000. But you really have to make sure you listen to this in context, because in context we have a super fat kick and bass, and there's just no space for the synthesizer, for the lead to have those low frequencies. So it's really important, and one of my most important tips for you as well, to not really do much in solo, but rather, like, if you EQ stuff, listen to the whole track, or listen to at least for example, if you are EQing your kick drum, listen to like the kick drum and some synthesizers, some drums. Like, best is if you listen to the whole track and try to figure out the EQ like this, because essentially what I would do is I would check how much difference I hear when everything else is playing and I'm taking away the low frequencies. And the point is, I don't really hear much difference, but rather it just feels a little more cleaner in the like low mid area, high bass area. So therefore, it makes a lot of sense to cut here. Then we have a little bit of additional reverb. I've used a huge shimmer reverb. If you want that preset, you have to check this video. It's linked up here about the hybrid reverb, and you can download it for free there, right? Check the video out. Hybrid reverb, incredible tool in the new Ableton 11. It's actually not that new anymore, but still very, very cool tool. We have some sidechain compression in the end with the kick drum, and this is the whole sound. So let me just hype you up a little bit for the next video. We're gonna have a look at this kick and bass group here, which is incredibly nice in terms of rhythm and sound design. You can see that's like 4 different layers working very nicely together. We have some drums. And for sure, we wanna have a look at the second lead as well. And I might even add this lead to your free download list next week. So make sure to come back. And until then, guys, have a good time and keep making music.